started?
Sure, yeah. So my name's Keith Chambers. I'm the product management lead in the Yammer team for the Foundations team, and we focus on things like compliance. We announced that we expanded to another geographical region. That's part of what the team does, working with our partners and our developers around our API.
And I'm Samir Sitaram. I'm a product manager on Keith's team, and I'm going to focus mostly on the API and platform and some of the integration aspects with Microsoft 365 as a whole.
Yeah, what's great, so Samir recently joined, but he actually came to Microsoft from Yammer. He was part of the acquisition and then has worked in other different groups inside of Microsoft, and reached out to him a couple months ago and asked him if he'd want to come back, and he was really excited to come back, so
yeah.
We're excited to have him.
And it's an exciting time to come back to Yammer. I think there's a lot of things happening in terms of integrating Yammer closer with, integrating Yammer into Office 365, and those are the things we're going to talk about today. So a quick look at the agenda that we have for you today. How many folks over here are familiar with Yammer? I know you guys are, but anybody who's not familiar with Yammer? Okay, so nobody's not familiar with it. We'll run through a quick couple slide intro on what Yammer is, sort of give you a direction on where we're heading. And then we'll walk through our security and compliance landscape as it exists today, and then talk about some of the futures that we have planned out. So in terms of Yammer's mission is essentially to empower and connect every person across the organization to maximize their impact. You can sort of break this into three different buckets. You've got your leadership engagement, corporate communications, and communities and knowledge. When it comes to leadership engagement, really leaders impact their organization, and Yammer provides a platform for leaders to connect with the broad organization. Take Microsoft, for example. We've got a group called CEO Connection, where Satya posts there, people ask questions. It's almost a two-way street in that group. And there's a lot of feedback that is gathered in that group and really gives Satya an opportunity to sort of opine his opinion across the organization. We want to build on this particular use case with other Office 365 products, like with SharePoint, with Teams, with Stream, to really build out a complete leadership engagement scenario. But that's one of Yammer's missions over here. The second one is corporate communications, the idea to modernize your corporate communications. A lot of organizations use archaic forms of communication to reach out to employees. With Yammer, you have a nimble and modern way of connecting with your employees. And again, back to that two-way street. HR posts an update on Yammer. There's a ton of questions. It's out in the open. People can ask those questions. People can read those questions and answers and really sort of feed themselves with it. The third one is around communities and knowledge. And this is where Yammer shines as well. And I can tell you from my personal example, right before I joined Keith's team on the Yammer team, I helped run a service called Multi-Geo, and it was brand new to Microsoft. People didn't know about it. We have 125,000 employees at Microsoft, and a lot of them are spread across the country and the world. So what I did was I created a community for Multi-Geo on Yammer, and then started with 4 people, started with an engineer, another PM, and then slowly started building this community out. Within a year, we had over 1,000 people in this community, and mainly salespeople, and they wanted to find out about, essentially what the service was, how they sell it, who buys it, what pricing is, and so on and so forth. So all of these questions really came into one single group called the Multi-Geo Yammer group, and that became a knowledge base, right? Over time, the community started, sort of feeding itself, in the sense that we created champions out of people who are regularly posting, and they were able to answer other people's questions. So this really turned into a sort of a snowball experience for us. So Yammer really shines in that area as well, in terms of creating communities, and really democratizing knowledge across the organization. In terms of Yammer's superpowers, number of superpowers over here. For me, the biggest one over here is the ability for users to come into a familiar, simple UX, have a very inclusive and open experience, and really share their ideas, right? Unfettered communication is the idea of Yammer. It needs to be lightweight, needs to be simple. There's no learning curve or a training curve. The only curve over here is culture. There's a culture curve, and once you've gone across that and you're on Yammer, you can really start to use a lot of these benefits and features, if you will. So again, open and inclusive, the ability for you to capture knowledge in a single spot. It's lightweight, it's embeddable. Yammer is really that enterprise social layer across Microsoft 365. Yammer is not a destination. It's not just yammer.com. You should be able to experience social from across the suite. In terms of switching gears here a little bit, talking about Microsoft's security compliance and admin promises, Microsoft has one of the broadest compliance portfolios of any cloud service provider. In terms of protecting your information, there are over 3,500 security cyber professionals at Microsoft that essentially manage our critical operations and ensure that our services are kept up to snuff, if you will. There's a series of controls available as well, both on the application and the data, so you can control which users can use your applications, how your data is exposed, where you want to export your data, and so forth. There's a tremendous amount of intelligence built into the Office Graph as well, and intelligence in terms of informing you of actions that your users have taken. Maybe there's a security threat and you want to get forewarned of it. Those sort of tidbits can come through our intelligence graph over here. And like I said, we've got a broad compliance portfolio which is constantly evolving, the largest of any cloud service provider. In terms of our approach, we've got a layered security approach, and this is more Yammer-centric. We've made the slide more Yammer-centric. So if you look at the physical and the logical layer, so whether it's managing access permissions or building security and so forth, obviously Microsoft's got over 100 data centers around the world that they manage very, very effectively. On the logical side, there is separation of data between tenants. There's logical separation of data, so there's no chance that you're actually going to leak data between two tenants. And then on the Yammer front, there's a number of different customer-managed features. So you can sort of break this down into customer controls and Microsoft controls to ensure that you have this layered security experience. Right? So on the Yammer front, we've got authentication through Azure Active Directory. You could set up multi-factor authentication on Yammer. You could say that, hey, I want conditional access to be also set up, and conditional access is to say that, hey, users can only access this application from X or Y IP range, and if you're outside that range, you won't be able to log in and so forth. Yammer's got mobile application management built in with Intune, so if you wanted to ensure that data within the Yammer application on an unmanaged device is still secure, you can go ahead and use MAM over there. And there's a number of other features that are customer controlled and customer managed around keyword monitoring, exporting data, and so forth, so that you can fulfill your security and compliance obligations. A lot of these features are automatically moving into Microsoft 365. Microsoft 365 has got a broad compliance and security portfolio, and that's exactly what we want to plug into as we go along. In terms of Yammer's compliance features, Yammer's got a lot of ISOs and SOCs and HIPAA attestments and EU model clauses and so forth. And you can find all of this information at the Trust Center. So if you're a regulated company and you need access to these documents, simply go to the Trust Center and you should be able to find it there. So that was a quick sort of gloss over security and compliance for Yammer and Microsoft. We're going to switch gears now and talk more about data residency and data localization. Over time, like governments, third-party compliance officers have started regulating organizations on where they store their data in the cloud, and this concept is called data residency. It's starting to increase as time goes on. Governments are starting to understand the value of data and want it stored within specific regions. There could be a number of different reasons around why organizations want data residency. A lot of it is definitely compliance driven. We've also heard from employee unions around the world that hey, yeah, we need data to be stored within specific regions to meet our compliance obligations. A lot of customers also ask us about GDPR, and they say, hey, does GDPR mandate any sort of data residency? Based on the research we've done and spoken to a number of attorneys, we understand that GDPR does not mandate any sort of data residency. But again, you want to talk to your attorneys and really clarify that. But the broad idea of this slide is that, hey, data residency regulations are on the rise, and this is going to be in vogue as the cloud evolves. So how does Microsoft support data residency, Microsoft's got over 100 data centers around the world, right? This is one of the largest clouds. I believe there's only 2 other companies that have similar or large clouds compared to Microsoft. Over 100 data centers, and it's all built on the Microsoft Global Network Edge. So over 2,700 peering locations around the world, where internet traffic essentially connects into Microsoft. And then we work with a number of ISPs as well around the world to help them move their traffic onto Microsoft's network as quickly as possible. Like I mentioned earlier, from a compliance standpoint, one of the broadest portfolios. There's no standing access to customer data, so nobody has unfettered access to customer data within Microsoft systems. Everything has to go through multi-factor authentication, and there's obviously only scope to individuals who need to access those data stores for particular break-fix reasons, if you will. And then finally, it's highly secure by design, because security is not an afterthought. It's built into the application right from the get-go. It's as we're going through the application design process, security checks are performed. If something does not make Yammer more secure or Microsoft more secure, then we don't ship that feature. We hold off until the required security checks are completed. With that, we have something really exciting to announce to you today. It is the launch of Yammer in Europe. This is something that we've been working on for a little while, and it's finally come to fruition. Keith pulled it off over there, and Yammer is now available in Europe. And what does this really mean? It means that, hey, if you create an Office 365 tenant, a Microsoft 365 tenant in Europe, your Yammer network will automatically be created in Europe, which means that your data will be stored at rest within the European region. So if you need to, fulfill any sort of your compliance requirements in Europe, now you can go ahead and do that with Yammer available in Europe. Quick slide over here on the road that we took to attain data residency in Europe. In Q4 of last year, we went ahead and did a preview of in-geo storage for files at rest, and then earlier this year, we did in-geo storage, a preview for messages at rest within Yammer in Europe. And then as of today, if you go ahead and create a Microsoft 365 tenant, your data will be stored at rest within Europe, provided you provide a European address over there. And then in the future, we're going to do more work around this area, and we'll certainly have more regions to show and more in-geo data residency options available. So what does it mean for Yammer to achieve data residency in Europe? It means that your Yammer messages will be stored at rest in Microsoft's European Union data centers. Microsoft's got a number of data centers in the EU, so we'll store your data at rest over there if you create an Office 365 tenant or Microsoft 365 tenant in Europe. Microsoft commits to storing this data at rest in Europe, so if you need any sort of compliance accreditation or any sort of document that says that Microsoft commits to it, it's contractually backed, so we're able to provide that to you. And then the third piece is that regardless of where your data is stored at rest, whether it's in Europe or here in the United States, all users, regardless where they access Yammer from, will get a consistent experience, because you're still connecting to the Microsoft Global Network, you're connecting into Yammer's data stores. The application experience, the user experience is going to be same regardless of where you connect from. So what does data at rest essentially mean? What is our commitment over here? First, we're going to commit to storing your message body at rest. So anything you type into Yammer, like you type in a post, that message body will be stored at rest within the European Union if your tenant was created over there, if your Yammer network is over there. The other aspects are your files in SharePoint. So if you've got an Office 365 connected group, quick show of hands here, who's familiar with Office 365 connected groups? Okay, sounds like most of us are. So basically, if you have an Office 365 connected group, you can store your files in SharePoint, right? And because SharePoint is already enabled with multi-geo, and if the user's profile says that, hey, this user is located in Europe, his preferred data location is, say, EUR, we're automatically going to store those files at rest in Europe. So when you pop in a file into Yammer, into an Office 365 connected group, that file will be stored at rest within Europe because of that relationship with SharePoint. The same thing applies to files in Yammer storage as well. So Yammer's got 2 different storage modalities today, and we're moving more towards SharePoint, but any file uploaded into Yammer as well will be stored in the European region if your tenant was built over there. That's all well and good because we're going to give you this commitment. We've got a contractual commitment to back this as well. But there's something you can do as well in order to check further, trust and verify. Here, you can go to the M365 Admin Center. In the Admin Center, if you go under Organization Profile, you'll see that Yammer, along with Exchange, SharePoint, Skype, and Teams, is in Europe. And if you're adopting Office 365 today and you want to find out where Yammer stores its data at rest, simply go to office.com/datamaps, and you'll be able to see the regions where Yammer stores its data at rest in Europe. So again, trust and verify. We're gonna give this to you. It's available right now, so you can go to your tenant and see it. So in terms of next steps, so if you're a new Microsoft 365 customer, right, and you're just adopting Microsoft 365, you're just adopting Yammer, and you create a new tenant, you generally have to provide a physical address, a location, and choose a country. And if you do that, we're going to, say you choose Europe, we're going to create a new Yammer network for you in the European region. If you choose the United States, we're going to create a Yammer network here in the United States. So for new M365 customers, you get data residency, the promise of data residency, right out of the box. If you're a current Microsoft 365 customer and you absolutely require data residency in order to use a service like Yammer, feel free to contact your Microsoft account team, and they'll talk to you through the process it takes to hard provision your network from where it is today to Europe. Now remember, if this is not required, for a lot of customers, data residency is not absolutely required. Some customers may require it in highly regulated markets, but for the most part, customers don't need it. So if you're a current M365 customer and you're using Yammer today and you hear about European Union data residency, if there's no impact for you, there's no action for you, right? But if it's absolutely important for you to get this level of data residency, then you should go and contact your Microsoft account team.
Is anyone from the European Union, or this applies to you? Okay. You could grab me after and I can explain a little bit more. Yeah.
On to you now, Keith.
Okay. Just a couple quick things I'd add is that the files in SharePoint is starting to roll out now. It's not fully rolled out. So just want to be clear, it's starting to roll out now. And then I think you showed the data location card, and the team that's building that is about a month away from shipping it.
Okay.
So we've done the integration side on our part, and they just need to light it up in their UI. So that'll be there soon. Okay. And then maybe I can grab the... I don't know if this thing will. I have a whole football field. I want to use it. But I can't.
Yeah. I'll be a clicker.
OK. OK, so this is more future stuff, but I'm very excited about where we're going with it. And I think the best way to understand it is to understand a little bit of where Yammer came from. So I've only joined 11 months ago. I'm relatively new, but talking to people, I have a pretty good sense of how we got to where we're at. And so Yammer started in 2008 in San Francisco as a startup that wanted to bring enterprise social networking, or bring social networking concepts to the enterprise. And it was a venture-funded startup, so it wasn't Microsoft, right, with billions of dollars in revenue. It was a scrappy startup, venture-backed. And so like all startups, they had to prioritize certain things. And so for them, the focus was really on user features, gain adoption with users, focus on viral adoption, how do we get our way into the enterprise? And there was much less focus on the IT admins and admin concerns. It was like, get the users and we'll figure it out later, sort of the idea. There was a focus on open by default, which I think it's great in concept, and it probably works. I don't even know if Facebook would say this is a great concept anymore, but that's not what always works for enterprise, but that was kind of some of the DNA that was there. Yammer also wanted to be your destination for all things collaboration. Yammer was going to kill email. It was going to have chat messaging. It was going to do everything. It was going to be a destination at this time in the life cycle of the product. And I talked about viral acquisition. And so this strategy was pretty successful for Yammer. It grew to millions of monthly active users. It had millions of paid users, and it got Yammer acquired by Microsoft in 2012. So if we go to the next slide. So this is kind of like the next era, right? So Microsoft acquires Yammer. and it gets acquired into the Office product family. And during this time, the focuses are, that continues to be on users. In fact, a lot of what Microsoft does today came from Yammer. So Microsoft has 4 week-long hack weeks where everyone in the entire company, or at least in Redmond and San Francisco, all of engineering stops to work on new ideas they have, those sorts of things. That came from Yammer. That didn't come from Microsoft. That came from Yammer. And a lot of how Microsoft looked at user research and things like that, that came from Yammer. But so there was always the focus on the user features, but because it was Microsoft, there became an increasing focus on IT admins. And there was an understanding that IT admins are an important persona or person that we need to think about in this overall equation. Microsoft had much higher trust and compliance obligations than Yammer had. And there's just a huge investment on Yammer infrastructure and security and those sorts of things. Yammer always prided itself on being kind of top of its game on security. But there's just a lot that Microsoft layered on top. So there's a big investment there. And we started to build integrations with with Microsoft services. So Yammer had its own identity, but customers don't want to manage 2 identities, right? They want to move to Active Directory. And obviously, if we were building Yammer from scratch, we wouldn't have a non-Active Directory identity provider. Same thing around groups. We started to add support for these Office groups, right? But Yammer had its own legacy concept of groups. And Yammer has its own file storage, but we have SharePoint, right? And so we've built integrations for that. So we've been working on these integrations over the last 5-6 years, but we've been doing it in a way where we don't leave any customers behind, because we have millions and millions of users, and we can't just pull the plug on them, right? So we have to bring people along for the journey. And for us, the adoption pattern that we see has changed. It's no longer viral. It's Fortune 100 or 20 companies that are rolling out 300,000 users of Yammer today to their entire org. It's not just viral, invite your coworkers sort of thing. It's like these intentional corporate comms led or leadership led top-down rollouts. And Yammer became bundled with Office 365. So I think there's one SMB SKU that doesn't get it, but pretty much everyone else gets it. But kind of the obvious thing that happened here is that if I'm an administrator managing, I'll just generically say Office or Microsoft 365 workloads, I have pretty familiar tools for how to do that. But with Yammer, I have this challenge of I have the legacy Yammer resources, and we don't give you a way to not have Yammer groups. We don't give you a way to not have any files in Yammer. And I think we give you a way to not have identity, but there's definitely additional complexity that admins talk to us about. And I see it in slowing down rollouts, or people have started and then they stop because they're not sure how to manage group sprawl, things like that. So for sure, the admin complexity has gone up a bit as we've taken everyone on this journey with us. So if we look to now, so this is more where we're becoming Microsoft native. So first off, Microsoft has increased its investment in Yammer, meaning that we have more engineers than we had a year ago. It's been significantly increased. We're seeing lots of adoption with customers, and we're increasing our investment there. A primary focus. So primary focus for my organization, my team, my 3 PMs, is we are focused on IT admin concerns and making life great for IT admins so that everyone can roll out Yammer, so that everyone can run it, and so that admins truly love Yammer. In addition, the product is focused on leadership engagement, corporate communications, communities of knowledge. Those are relatively orthogonal from what my team is doing. I just want to do it in a way that admins love it and you can meet your compliance obligations. And so today we have more than 85% of the Fortune 500 depends on Yammer. And so this is kind of where we're going. You can see the year is on there. That's this year. We're not quite there yet, but we will be. And you can also, if we go back a bit, you can see that in this model, we've removed the dependency on these legacy Yammer resources. You don't have Yammer identity, you don't have Yammer groups, you don't have Yammer files. And so it simplifies the overall management process. It's just another Microsoft 365 workload that you're managing. And so what we're going to be introducing before the end of the year, I promise, is we're calling it Microsoft M365 native mode. This is borrowed the idea from Exchange used to have native mode when you would go from like Exchange 5.5 to 2000 or 2000 to 2003. But yeah, way back. But so we are going to have the ability for you to say, like, I want Yammer as if it was built at Microsoft, depending on only backend Microsoft resources, and I want it to be managed like all the other Microsoft services. And so you'll have the same controls that you can use to manage other Microsoft services. Like for groups, there's like group expiration policies, there's naming policies, there's group creation rights. Some users can create them, some can't. All of that will flow through into Yammer. You won't have any of these legacy resource providers to learn and manage. If you want to manage your files with your SharePoint, with compliance policies you do in SharePoint, you will be confident that every single file is in SharePoint. There will be no legacy Yammer files that you also need to worry about. Like, they will all be in SharePoint. You can use all the compliance features that are there, and all the future compliance features that are coming will be available to you. And that kind of gets to the roadmap acceleration, is that as we are talking to these different compliance teams, they have very compelling roadmaps, and we're just going to get them for free because we're making this shift to being Microsoft M365 native. So for your users, you're going to have a consistent experience throughout the product. So right now, Samir didn't talk about it, but for a leadership connection or leadership area, yeah, we have these live events. So Satya does a company town hall meeting or a live event with like 20 or 30,000 people every week, where he takes live questions on video on Yammer. But you can only get those if your group that you're in is an O365 group. And users can't see the difference in the product. Like, when do I get it? When do I not get it? It's just not clear. It's not it's not consistent through the product. That will change because that difference comes from us having impedance mismatches between the Microsoft resources and the Yammer resources, and so those will go away. All files will be in SharePoint, those sorts of things, and this will also help us accelerate our own roadmap in Yammer, because we'll have fewer different edge cases to think about and work through and try to balance it and get the user experience right for. We'll be able to focus more on fewer things. So got another slide here? Got two more. So kind of some of the details is that for users or identity, all access will be controlled through Azure Active Directory. Initially, this will just be users inside of your organization, but we will add support for guest users with Azure B2B. Azure B2B. All your groups will need to be Office 365 groups. We'll have public or private groups. Yammer also has a little flag to hide it from the directory. That's not supported in Office right now, so that's an example of something that won't be available. And then all the files, when you move into this native mode, we will actually do the migration of all the files into SharePoint. So without doing this, new files will be in SharePoint, but if you want them all there, you need to go into this mode, and then we actually move them all. And so why is this here? Where did these slides come from? Let's go back. That looks like the right one. Having worked at customers before and having to manage these sorts of things, I appreciate that it can be a little bit complicated. And so what we want to do is to make it simple for people to get from the mixed mode state or the integrated state or the state with the legacy resources into this native state. And so this is an example of what we're working towards, which is in the administration page, you'll have a tab you can go to for native mode. We will do a check and basically report back to you on all the changes that we would need to make for you to go from this mixed mode to the native mode. And then at the top, you'll have the ability to download a report that will give you more information. So for example, like, do we have hidden? Like 58 groups are hidden, and they're going to have to be made private. Well, you may want to know the name of the group, the owner of the group, when was the last activity, who's a member of it. So kind of our approach to building out what that report is going to look like is we've met with a bunch of customers. We show them this. We give them 2 minutes, and we say, read this, and explain it to us, like what's going to happen, and then explain to us what you would like to have in that report so that you could manage these changes with your users. So if you were completely naive and didn't care to manage any of these changes, you could probably complete this like in a couple minutes. But it's kind of like you can do it in 1, 2, 2, apparently. It's that simple. Yeah, so like 3 steps required to get there. So get the report, take a look at it, explain to people what's coming, how you're going to change it, and once you feel like you're ready, you click the button, and we put you into this native state. And so that is native mode. I think it's a really big deal, and I think it's going to help administrators quite a bit. And then we have this one last thing, which is eDiscovery. So how many people here are concerned about eDiscovery or have requirements around it? You all do. You just don't know it. But yeah, half the people raise their hands. So we've been talking to some of the largest or the largest financial services companies. Really if you have a 401k, we've been talking to the people that hold your 401k. If you have investments, we've been talking to them. And what we hear over and over is that customers really like this idea of Microsoft's Security and Compliance Center, where I have one spot I can go to and I can process subpoenas for data across all of my users' data, across my email, across my files, across my chats in Teams, across my conversations in Yammer. That one-stop shop really resonates. They like that. What we've also heard from customers is that the messages and the files that are uploaded through Yammer, those are communications, and they are subject to discovery requests, and they need to have them. All that data needs to be available, like all of it. It cannot be that, well, the private messages aren't, or my attachments that are in Yammer legacy are not discoverable. Like that doesn't work. It's all or nothing. They have to comply, or there could be a summary judgment against them. So it needs to all be in there. And then what we've also heard is that, hey, the person who administers Yammer is a totally different person from who administers eDiscovery, or who processes these requests. And they don't talk to each other. And I guess from a product perspective, it means we can't make any compromises. Like we have to get all of the data there. We have to fulfill this, otherwise it doesn't really work for customers. So that's what we've been hearing. And when we look at kind of, okay, that means we need to plug into Microsoft's eDiscovery system. And the way that works is, this kind of like how the sausage is made a little bit, but underneath that works is basically pulling data from 2 sources, either files that are in SharePoint or content that's in mailboxes. And if you look at this next slide, it's kind of the architecture for how this is going to work. And by the way, this is the exact same thing that Teams does. Teams and Yammer have the same integration into eDiscovery, is that the messages that get posted into Yammer will get copied through to the user's mailbox in a way that they can't see them, but they're actually stored underneath an Exchange. And then the files will just live in SharePoint. And so for things to be discoverable, they all need to be copied through, which is part of why everyone needs to have Active Directory, right? We cannot deliver eDiscovery if you can't discover all your data, which means we cannot have a separate identity provider and users without mailboxes. And it's why we cannot have our legacy Yammer storage anymore. We have to get everyone to SharePoint, right? So this drives the native mode. Make sense? Okay. So this is looking at kind of the eDiscovery product itself. And so, yeah, you can search across content through all these different workloads, do things like refine by keywords. You'll be able to select, I only want the Yammer messages, or I only want certain types of Yammer messages. We have announcements, we have polls, maybe you don't care about them. You can filter on that. And then in the E3 SKU, you can get the results, and you'll see the results, but they're going to be as a single message. You see the message, kind of as HTML, how it looked in Yammer, but you just get the single message. If we go forward to advanced eDiscovery, which is available with E5, they have a number of different available features with that. Kind of the biggest one that, well, the only one that's required us to do work is this native view with full conversation reconstruction. So it's pretty cool, but basically what it does is it pulls together the whole conversation and presents it to you in a way that looks like how it looks in Yammer. We're making some modifications to the Yammer UI, so this is a little bit directional, but it will look like how it looked in Yammer. And so if you need to bring it to court and show people, you can show them what the user actually saw when they typed some message, right? And that's a pretty critical thing that people need to do. And so just in terms of timelines, so first off, you can depend on these. Our EU Geo, we said we would ship that by the end of the year. We shipped that today, or 2 days ago. You can depend on these. So that's kind of like the first big thing we've done. Files in SharePoint for the connected groups. If they're connected, new files that get added, that is rolling out now. At the end of June, we're going to have a preview for eDiscovery. It's a private preview with just 5 customers and Microsoft IT. But that's happening in June. And then before the end of the year, we're going to GA, so you can use it. Everyone will be able to use it. eDiscovery, advanced eDiscovery. This is when native mode will come out. You'll have legal hold. And then Samir is our PM for data governance. We wrote the spec for that this morning. So that's coming next. Oh, we'll fix that. Yeah, no, good call. Yeah, no, that's this year. I'm glad you brought that up. Someone on my team might have used that for later. Yeah, so, maybe the last thing I'll say is that building eDiscovery it's been a lot of work for us to get the messages in there. Once we build the data governance, which is like data retention policies, they kind of go hand in hand. People need fine-grained policies. Once we build that, that's like the back channel from this compliance center system. And then all the other features start to be much, much simpler for us to build, because now we have two-way communication with it. And so we can start to add more much more quickly. So I'm really optimistic about where we're going. I think that we're going to snap to what a proper Microsoft product looks like from an admin experience. And we're going to do it quick. If you read the terms, every user needs it. Yes, I'll just leave it at that. Yeah. Any questions? We'll be around so you can grab us. Cool. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.